Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call this December 7th, 2017 City Council meeting to order. Ms. McLean, would you please give us a roll call, please?
Councilman Woodford.
Present.
Councilman Henry.
Here.
Mayor Shelton. Vice Mayor Epps.
Here.
Councilman Womack.
Here.
4 present, 1 absent.
And we do have a quorum. To begin our meeting, we were going to begin with the invocation. We invite everybody to participate in that if you so choose. This was going to be given by Mr. Christian Smith over at the First Cumberland Presbyterian Church.
Let us pray. Glorious and loving God, we thank you tonight for every blessing that is ours. We thank you for every gift that has been given to us. And tonight, as we gather in this place, we praise you for a wonderful city. We praise you for a great place to live. We praise you for all of those who choose to serve this city. We also thank you for citizens who are passionate about the city in which they live. And as we conduct business tonight, as decisions are made, as discussions are had, we pray, Lord, for discernment. We pray, Lord, for compromise. We pray, Lord, for your guidance in the things that would be done. We pray, Lord, that in all things we would glorify you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Smith. I'd like now to invite everybody to join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Item 3 on our agenda is to consider approval of the agenda as presented. Do I have a motion for approval?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have any discussion? No discussion. Vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item 4 is appointments, proclamations, presentations, or awards. It's consider appointments to the Sewer Regulations Appeal Board. This is sponsored by Mr. Ronnie Kelly.
Mayor and Council, the Sewer Regulation Appeals Board was established in 1988. The board is made up of 5 members appointed to 3-year terms, and they cannot serve more than 2 full 3-year terms without a 1-year break. The board is set up to conduct hearings on appeals of decisions of the director and actions taken under and pursuant to the sewer use ordinance. Since being established, the board has yet to meet and hear an appeal. Current board members Brian Johnson and Kevin Young's terms have expired. Brian Johnson's the plant manager at Cookeville Plating, and he's agreed to serve again another term on the board. Kevin Young is a civil engineering professor at Tennessee Tech, and he has declined to serve another term. And we would recommend that Phil Staten of Clinton Engineering, here, a local engineer here in town, he's agreed to serve on the board, and we would recommend those 2 applicants. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. All right. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Accept this member as so moved. So I have a first and a second. And do we have any or nominations from the City Council? Hearing none, are you prepared to vote? All right, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion
Thank you.
carries.
All right, on to item 5. This is old business. We're going to approve the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as held on November 2nd, 2017?
So moved.
So move. We have a second. And do we have any discussion? Yep, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, 5B is considered on the second and final reading ordinance 017018, amending the Cookeville Municipal Code Title 15, Chapter 6, relative to public parking provisions. And this is sponsored by Mr. James Mills.
Vice Mayor and council members, this ordinance applies to on-street parking and parking within the city parking lots or city-owned or city-controlled parking lots, and also parking adjacent to city streets within the city rights-of-way. The classification of thoroughfares is used to determine Where you can park, which is identified in the ordinance. These are the summary of the regulations. This is a complete rewrite of Title 15, Chapter 6 of the Municipal Code. It was a joint effort between the Planning Department, the Police Department, the Codes Department, Public Works, the City Manager, and City Attorney. The amendments were reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission and are recommended by the Planning Department. We've had no calls or comments since first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have any comments or questions, discussion from my council members? I'd like to, not hear any, I'd like to just make a statement before we vote that a lot of work went into this, and you said complete rewrite, James. It certainly is.
Yes, sir.
Complete rewrite, and it's quite extensive, and I think it's going to help for those of you and council members that we do park downtown and spend a lot of time downtown. It's going to make a big difference.
We hope so.
We really appreciate, don't we, council members, the work that this group has done.
Absolutely.
If no other questions or comments, let's vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
All right, item 5C is consider on second and final reading ordinance 017019, amending the Cookeville Municipal Code title, Chapter 15, Chapters 1, 7, and 8. And this again is relative to parking issues, particularly citations, impound lot, and et cetera. This is sponsored by Chief Evans.
Mayor and council, this ordinance amends Title 15, Chapters 1 and 7, and also adds Chapter 8, which deals with our on-call wrecker service. Section 15104 is deleted, and then the language contained in this ordinance replaces that. And also Section 15704 is deleted in its entirety and replaced with the language in this ordinance. And Chapter 8, as we noted in first reading, is a new chapter that deals with an on-call wrecker service. We had a request from one of our wrecker service providers to look at our rates, consulted MTAS, and they encouraged us to do this by ordinance as opposed to by policy. So that's why we generated this chapter. And it just become simpler to write a new chapter than it was to try to amend a section of the old ordinance. It is a voluntary participation. Essentially, it outlines the application process. It sets the rates, which are set by the council. And it also authorizes the police department to establish administrative rules. We've had no calls or comments since first reading, and I'd recommend your approval.
All right, gentlemen, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do we have, you have any questions, comments, amendments? All right. Having none, let's vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
On to our consent agenda, which is item 6. Consent agenda item A is set a date, January 4th, 2018, for a public hearing on ordinance 0171223, rezoning 835 South Maple Avenue from regional commercial to general commercial. Item B is set a date for the 4th, also for the 4th of January 2018, again for a public hearing on ordinance 0171224, rezoning property located on West 9th Street and North Franklin Avenue. And this on the tax map is identified as 401-D-1.00 and 2.00. This is going to be changed from RS, single residential family 10, to PRD, Planned Residential Development. That's item B. Okay, C is set a date again for January 4th, 2018 for a public hearing on ordinance 0171225. This is rezoning property located on South Willow Avenue, West Jackson Street, Poly Drive, and West Stevens Street. And on the tax map, it's denoted as number 53J-J-1.00. This is going to be changed from regional commercial to general commercial. And again, item D is considering awarding bids for wire and transformers, and that comes from the electric department. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
I'll move in a second. If there's any questions or comments or removal to take out, if there's not any, we'll all vote. Vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Now we're on to new business. All right, item 7A, new business, is to hold a public hearing and consider for our first reading, ordinance O-171120, amendments to various sections of the zoning code to revise provisions for bed and breakfast homes and insert provisions relative to short-term rental properties. And this is again sponsored by Mr. Mills.
Mr. Vice Mayor, members, as you stated, this ordinance would amend the current zoning code standards for bed and breakfast homes and insert requirements for short-term rental properties. Short-term rental properties, which includes uses such as Airbnb, vacation rental by owner, have increased both in number and in popularity across the nation. The zoning code currently does not specifically address Airbnb or similar short-term rental properties with the exception of bed and breakfast homes. Bed and breakfast homes are addressed in section 206.3 of the zoning code and are permitted as special exceptions in several of the single-family residential zoning districts, in our multifamily and in our commercial zoning districts. They're subject to compliance with provisions of section 206.3, which are included on the screen here. So these are our existing requirements for bed and breakfast homes. Short-term rental properties, especially those that are not owner-occupied, may have negative impacts on nearby properties in single-family residential areas. These include transient residents, noise, trash, increased traffic, and impact on property values. They're also concerned that such uses are commercial uses and do not pay commercial taxes. So for the past 2 months, the Planning Commission has held public hearings and developed proposed regulations, and that's the ordinance that's before the council tonight, which is ordinance 171120. The major components of the proposed ordinance are as follows. It revises the definition of bed and breakfast home. It inserts a new definition for short-term rental properties, and it revises our current standards for bed and breakfast homes as follows. It limits it to owner-occupied only within single-family residential districts. Currently, it allows owner or operator-occupied. It limits the maximum number of guests at 5. Currently, there is no limit on the number of guests. It's based on the number of guest rooms. It prohibits guests from having special events. It prohibits subleasing of rooms. It requires proof of insurance, liability insurance, a minimum of $1 million. The special exception, if approved, is not transferable to a new owner. It provides that if there are a number, 3 violations within a 12-month period, that the special exception may be revoked or can be revoked by the Codes Department. And it also exempts the rental of a single-family residential dwelling for a period of 14 days in any 12-month period. Regarding short-term rental properties, this ordinance would establish provisions for such uses. It requires that a short-term rental permit application be submitted to the Codes Department and a permit be issued. And there is a required fee of $100 and an annual renewal fee of $50. They must obtain a business license. They must have proof of insurance. They can't be rented for less than 24 hours. The property owner is responsible for collecting and remitting any applicable local or state or sales tax. It limits the occupancy to 2 adults and 2 children per sleeping room. There are specific fire protection requirements. I think I've gone through most of those. Perhaps the most significant aspect of the proposed ordinance would be to allow only owner-occupied bed and breakfast or short-term rental properties in single-family residential districts. Non-owner occupied short-term rentals would be only allowed in commercial zoning districts and multifamily zoning districts. The proposed zoning code amendments have been approved by the Planning Commission. The Planning Department concurs with this recommendation, but we also have 2 additional recommendations for revisions to the current or proposed ordinance. The first would be to revise section 206.3B to specify that a maximum of guest rooms would be limited to 3, so no more than 3 guest rooms in any bed and breakfast home. We'd also recommend that sections 206.3Q and 206.26D, and those are the 2 sections that deal with the exemptions for rentals of 14 days within any 12-month period, that be revised to specify that a temporary short-term rental permit must be obtained from the Cookeville Codes Department. So with those amendments or proposed revisions, the Planning Department recommends for approval.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mills. Okay, do we have a motion to accept this first reading to go on forward?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion to second. So now we can have some discussion. And I just have a question of a point of order, parliamentary process. What? Yeah, so that's what I was wanting to make sure that we got before. So we do that. We're going to do that before. We're going to have a public hearing before the council has a chance to have our discussion about this. We welcome listening to comments, questions, and recommendations from the public. We do have a few ground rules. It just, if you can come up, if you feel the need to speak, if you could come up to the podium, state your name, your address, just let us know where you live, and then we need to limit the time to about 3 minutes, right about 3 minutes. And Miss McLean is going to she's got a nice little clock there that has a nice little alarm, let you know when you went too long. So, that being said, we'll open up the public hearing portion of this meeting on this part.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Lytle. I live at 117 North Dixie, and I'd like to start out by commending the Planning Department on the work they've done. The proposed ordinance is much, much better than the current ordinance, and in that respect, I certainly hope it passes. Like everything, it could be, in my view, better here and there. But I'd like to just discuss one aspect, if I could, and that's the 14-day exemption. I personally don't see any rational basis or any logic in having that. If my understanding is the 14 days, anyone can have a bed and breakfast or a short-term rental. Doesn't matter the size of their house. It can be an apartment, it can be an efficiency, whatever. They can do it for 14 days. Mr. Mills has taken a good step forward in requiring a temporary permit, but still the fact remains they don't have to comply with any of the requirements that the Planning Commission has worked through these last few months. For example, in the bed and breakfast section, that means there's no parking requirements for them because they're exempt from everything in the ordinance. They're not required to have any insurance. They don't have a restriction on special events such as weddings and receptions. There's no restriction on food preparation or cooking. There's no consideration for it going in front of the Historic Zoning Commission if they're in a historic area. It seems to me that the enforcement of that would be difficult at best and probably impossible, because if someone doesn't come down and get a temporary permit, no one's going to know that they've done it unless the neighbors complain. And if you're only talking a day or two here and there, by the time the neighbors figure out what's going on, they've moved on to something else. And if someone's going to abuse the process, if codes does come out and say, how many times have you had someone staying here, they're not going to say they've had them 14 times. Oh, half of those were my relatives from out of town. So I don't see that this exception in any way is in the best interest of the community, especially the neighbors around. And it would seem to me we've put together a good ordinance with good restrictions, and that ought to be it. I can't think of any other ordinance in the city that allows everybody to do what they want to for 14 days a year without regard to the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lytle. Anybody else in the audience that would speak to this? Yes.
Here maybe to offer a counter view. From a landlord, my name is Chad Gilbert.
Yes,
Sorry,
please,
67
Chad.
North Washington. I'm a landlord, developer, and I actually have a couple short-term rentals that are outside the city limit. But James and I have had a discussion about this maybe for the better part of 2 years, and primarily for me, it's another property right that's being taken away from an owner and a landlord and a property manager, and an ability to use their property as right now I contend the ordinance permits. I've articulated to James on more than one occasion that, and I think I've copied some of y'all. The ordinance doesn't speak to right now. In short, what the proposed ordinance to me reads like is it's just putting a term limit on it. It's saying you can't rent to anyone for less than 30 days, and that's not consistent with. I reached out to some other communities, namely Murfreesboro. Their body of ordinances reads most like ours as anyone else, and they take the same position. They say, you know what, we have ordinances that say who can stay. They have definitions of family just like we do. They have definitions of zone. Well, they have zones that qualify what families, and those definitions can live, and how they inhabit, how they dwell, how they reside there. And if those are abided by, why do we care how long someone stays there? And I went to most of the planning commission meetings, and most of the sentiments that came were just, well, we just don't like it. We just don't like not knowing what's going on next door. And although the idea of that may be true to them, the ordinance doesn't entitle them to know or like what's going on next door. The ordinance speaks to what it entitles folks to do and what it doesn't. And I think this is being stretched so that it imposes on others, namely folks like myself who may own property or manage on the behalf of others. It says, you know what? You now have to rent for more than 30 days. And last planning commission meeting I was at with, James and I had some discussion about that. And I mentioned corporate leases, co-tenant leases, some of the vehicles by which we transact. And he said, well, it's okay. You can rent to a hospital, and they can run nurses through here as long as they're not paying the hospital. Well, what's the difference? They're just as transient as these other menacing people that folks have described. And just because they don't pay, they're less dangerous. And I want to push back on this notion that they devalue property. That's just not true. The property's more valuable. Now, James and I have had spirited discussions about that, and he said, well, that's because you can do this, this, and this with it. Well, regardless of what can be done with it, it's still worth more money. So the idea that it devalues property just is not well founded. I offer too that, this idea that current ordinances and maybe even this proposed one are going to be citizen policed, and what I mean by that is and James makes a good point. Hey, these ordinances are written in the spirit of most people are going to abide by them. Well, and if they don't, we're not going to spend our time going and knocking on doors and trying to find out who's not. But we're going to, if people report on them, then we're going to deal with it. Well, this is unique. This is on the internet, so we can report on folks. And James and I have had this conversation too. I've gotten long-term leases through that platform. I advertise on there, and people will call in and say, hey, I'll take it for 6 months, or I'll do this or whatever else. Well, that would be okay per the ordinance, but if I'm on this platform, well, then everyone's calling in just a nervous wreck that I'm renting it for less than 30 days, which has been well qualified as dangerous. And that's just not true. That's just whipping up emotion and just stirring up, the idea that we want to know more about what's going on next door.
If you could, Mr. Gilbert, if you could
I know
kind of
I'm running out of time.
wrap it up, yeah.
You know what? To speak to Mr. Lytle's point, I don't agree with him necessarily, but I do agree that the 14-day is inconsistent. I think everybody ought to have one if they want it. I really don't care. Just the more the merrier for me. But if it's okay 14 days, why can't it be okay the rest of the time? And so, just the inconsistencies. And then just to wrap it up, right now, if you and everybody's done it, you go on the internet, you can see them through. They're all up and down in the city limits, and by James's admission, none of them are legal, but nothing gets done about it. So we're creating this idea that unless it's reported on by a neighbor, which sounds just ridiculous, that we want to rely on citizens to report on each other and create this state of mind that, hey, unless you turn somebody in, nothing's going to happen. I think that's risky.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Do we have anybody else that would like to get up and speak on this?
Yeah, I'm Bill Barnhart live at 326 North Dixie. The issue of the 14-day exemption, there have been some good points made. First of all, frankly, from our standpoint, we'd rather not see any permission or any ordinance to allow bed and breakfast, especially in residential areas. The point that whether or not this makes property more valuable to have an exemption or bed and breakfast is a point that needs to be considered. It seems to me in residential areas such as a historic district within Cookeville that the idea of a historic distance is predicated on this is in fact a historic part of town that was residential. And if you pass an ordinance or you allow provisions and exemptions that make the property more valuable, speculators may well want to come in and buy up property in those historic districts and essentially defeat the purpose of having a part of Cookeville that preserves some of the past. So the point I would make to the council is I'd rather not have any bed and breakfast within a historic district. And if you have this exemption and you pass this ordinance as written, which is better than the initial draft of it, without a way to enforce this voluntary 14-day provision, there's very difficult path to enforce it after the fact. There's no documentation and it's hearsay, and it just seems like you're creating a potential legal nightmare to allow that 14-day exemption. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir.
I'm Sherry Lytle. I live at 117 North Dixie Avenue, and I would like to discuss the property values that could be affected by allowing an exemption to the ordinance to be put in place. I spoke with more than one licensed realtor here in Cookeville and was told by both that there is a Tennessee residential property condition disclosure form that each seller of property must fill out when they decide to sell a home. And on page 3 of this form, there is a checkbox for neighborhood noise problems or other nuisances. And these realtors told me that if there's a short-term rental or a bed and breakfast or any of this type of business going on either adjacent to your property or even in your neighborhood, you don't even have to be right next door to it, that you would be required to disclose that to potential buyers. So I believe that would bring down the property values of the other homes. So that would be raising maybe the property values of the rental home if someone wanted to purchase a home and run rentals out of it. But it would be at the expense of the other neighbors by depreciating those property values. And again, I appreciate all that you all are doing also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lytle. Any others like to speak on the topic? Okay, if yes, sir. Because if you don't get up here pretty soon, I'm gonna shut it down. About ready. Do as long as we need to.
My name is David Hume. I live on Dixie Avenue at 310. It just turns out that I've talked to James Mills today again. He's very courteous at all times. And I talked to all the council members who are here tonight for a very long time. Appreciate you all taking that amount of time to talk with me. Anyway, I followed this from the beginning for the last 2 or 3 months, and been to not all the meetings, but several of them. And I think the ordinance as drafted, first of all, is a great improvement to the existing law and needs to be passed. And second, the only other point I wish to make is, and I agree with all the details of the provision as it's been written, the planning office has to contend with many different constituencies, developer types, residential types like me. I'm a strong conservationist. I could not be stronger for single-family residential protection. than anyone in this room. Anyway, I think that short-term rental section and the single-family home, the bed and breakfast section are as good as we can make them right now, the planning office. But I think that there's still a question on like 206.3Q, which has just been referenced. That's the one that's the 14-day exemption in the bed and breakfast area, which is single-family residential. And if there's any significant question, as a minimum, I think that ought to be deferred or tabled, whatever the council wishes. But I think it needs further study if there's any question in your mind, in the council members' minds. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I appreciate all your service, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Hume. Anybody else? Okay. Yes, sir.
I suppose I'll speak up to, my name is Bill Haverkamp. I live at North Dixie Avenue, and I wanted to speak up to express my appreciation. And I may be going in a little different direction, but I'm opposed to some of the, I understand the arguments, and I realize it's a difficult problem, and I appreciate all the work that's been done. And maybe this is unrelated, but what I see is the single biggest abuse in our city is the violation of no more than one related person in a structure. I see that everywhere. And I've done my own research, and there's a lot of single-family residential homes that'll have multiple tenants in them. I don't know if they're all on the lease or just one. And these landlords and property owners are not paying the higher property tax rate. Maybe that's a county issue, not a city issue. But so there's an abuse there that I see all over our city. And so I think giving more latitude to allow whatever, short-term rentals, is just creep in that same direction, where it seems to be it's more economical for property managers to have single-family homes, call it a single-family home, and pay the lower property tax rate and then use it however they please. And I can even point to instances where it's clearly being used commercially, but I look on the map and they're being billed at the 25% assessment rate, not the higher rate. It's even right up the street from us. So that's why I think I'm fundamentally opposed to not keeping the rules strict, because I already see a lot of abuse in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Haberkamp. Anyone else speak on this issue? All right. If so, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing and allow some time for my council members with questions, requests, etc. Yes.
Mr. Vice Mayor, thank you. James, a couple of questions. You and I have talked about it a little bit previously. Two questions, actually. One is my concern, as has been voiced already here tonight, is the enforcement piece of this. You know how I feel about it. If we adopt an ordinance and we either can't or won't enforce it, it makes a mockery of that ordinance. And I know that, it seems to me to dump the enforcement on the neighborhood is not fair. But you put some things in, like the temporary permit. Talk about what has been done as it relates to enforcement to deal with these issues, if you will.
Well, I think it's unfair to pick this one use out, or proposed use out. I mean, it would be treated like any other zoning code violation. And of course, any zoning code violation, any use violation, and Mr. Hapkamp spoke about that, those happen, and unless we're made aware of it, we can't see behind closed doors. So I mean, it is a difficult thing to do, but to have we do have standards to enforce if we become aware of a violation. But if the number of people, he brought this up, and it's always been an issue, or it has been for the last 20 years, how many people unrelated live in a house, it's difficult for us to know unless it's brought to our attention, because we don't keep a list of who lives in each house or what, we don't have that kind of information, and I don't know that we legally can get that kind of information. But if we are made aware of a violation, then we will enforce it based on our codes. If we don't have a code to address it, then there's nothing we can do. So that's part of what we're doing here. And the addition of the requirement that they obtain a permit will help us keep a list of those that are legal, that are approved, and be able to keep up with it. Now, I can't tell you that there's not going to be violations of the zoning code. They happen, I'm sure, almost daily. You know, and we find out mostly through citizens letting us know that there's a potential violation. We have codes enforcement officers that go out and check. It's the same thing as an overgrown lot. We don't drive every street in the city daily, but neighbors will see there's a violation, and they're anonymous when they call. Hey, there's a problem here. You need to check on it. We don't have our police officers don't drive looking for these. It's all part of the zoning code and the codes enforcement officers.
So to the extent that a permit expired, let's say went 15, 20 days, whatever, then we would basically have no way to know that unless somebody reported that, or would we?
That's correct. And it's the same thing. I'll give you another good example, our yard sales. So we require a yard sale permit. Now, we keep a list of those, but if they run 4 days instead of 3 days, I mean, we're not going by and checking that. We don't have the manpower. We don't have, if we want to spend those kind of tax dollars to have that type of enforcement power, we can. But that's just not realistic to have that. We don't have the personnel to do that. There are other types of uses just like that we have, you know, we just don't have the personnel to go check every day each individual use.
My last question, Mr. Vice Mayor, if I could, talk about a little bit about this matter of the 14 days.
Okay.
How that came into being and why you think that's an important piece of this whole matter.
Well, this process, and it's been talked about, we've been looking at this for months, and we've looked at many different cities, and I've had comments from the wide gamut, from those in favor, those against, and some of the suggestions we had was, you know, they was restricting how a person can use their property. That's a big concern by a lot of the public. You know, you're telling me what I can do with my property. This was an attempt at a compromise, and the examples given to me, and in my opinion, I thought made some sense. For example, were the Eclipse. We had people that wanted to rent out their homes for that weekend because they could make a large amount of money for that weekend. They were concerned that we'd be able to take that ability away from them. They don't want to open or operate a bed and breakfast. They don't want to operate a short-term rental. It's just an opportunity to, augment their family income for that weekend to take advantage of a particular event. Another example given to me was that a property owner has a home in the vicinity of the hospital. The hospital had approached them. They had a visiting physician. They wanted to be able to rent their house out while they were on vacation, to rent their house out to this visiting doctor for a week. And this would allow these special types of occurrences to happen. And that was the thought process in it, was not to totally curtail the individual's right to use their dwelling.
Thank you. Councilman Henry.
John, let me go back to bed and breakfast. Currently, the way the ordinance reads, you can have bed and breakfast right now and in any zone. Is that correct?
As a special exception in the
Special
residential
exception.
districts, that's correct.
So then getting back to short-term rental, where somebody's particularly wanting to get a piece of property and rent it basically by the day, you know, getting to Mr. Haverkamp's example where somebody takes a house in a residential where people, I'm going to use an example of students, that 3 or 4 students are living in a single family. Typically that's by a semester, 3, 4, 5, 6 months at a time. We're not trying to outlaw short-term rental, Airbnb. We're just wanting to put it in particular zones,
I think the overall premise of our ordinance is it makes a distinction between owner-occupied and the full commercial, non-owner investment type properties. And
Right.
They are just basically operated as commercial operations. They rent out by day or by a couple of days, by room, where, it can typically generate more revenue than it could to rent out to a typical single-family home. We've talked about this. I think probably what makes us unique from most of the other cities in the state, and from some perspective it's a bad thing, from others it's a good thing, is our definition of family, of single family. Right. We have one of the stricter definitions in the state, and we did that intentionally to try to protect our single family areas. Lots of cities allow a lot more unrelated people than we do, and that's where we're unique, but I believe we're unique for a good reason, to try to protect our single family residential areas. But we are one of the most strict in the state.
because we've had, like you said, for several months, and open meetings and being transparent and letting the citizens talk to us about their concerns, what they're worrying about, what they don't want, what they'd like to see. It's like with any legislation, what we come up with, it's not going to be perfect. We're trying to compromise with whether it's a developer or a homeowner to be fair. You know, we're not trying to penalize anybody or promote somebody. It's just a case of trying to be fair. If we do pass this ordinance tonight as it is presented to us, if we see something later on, we can come back and amend it and change what we see that we either overlooked or misinterpreted. It is flexible, so it can be changed, but we need some groundwork. We need something to start with. I think with the provision we're doing in improving the bed and breakfast, we're giving residential neighborhoods more protection with the bed and breakfast than they have currently. So I think they would prefer to have, even though they don't like exactly what we have come up with, they would like to have it than have nothing. And I can't, and even though I know at some point next year the state legislature is going to pick this up and discuss this because it is a hot topic about short-term rental, that I don't want to wait for them to either do something or not do something. I think we need to be proactive on this and be fair with our citizens and respect what their concerns are.
Councilman, do you have anything?
Yes. I've had several opinions of this. I went to the Tennessee Municipal League in Sparta last week, and they were talking about how it could be a hot topic about Nashville and Airbnb, and then talking with Mr. Mills, and some of you have contacted me about this. I think this ordinance does give some protection to people right now. The one thing that disturbs me is this 14-day exemption where you can do most anything, say for eclipses or doctors wanting to rent your house, but that's still disturbing. I can remember when we did the historic Dixie thing back about 20 years ago. It was about 19 or 20 years ago, and I think historic Dixie has done quite well. But the 14-day exemption is disturbing. I think with the mayor not here, I'm for this ordinance, except for this 14-day exemption, and I'd like to make a amendment, and it may die for a lack of a second, and that's fine. But I still like that we exempt the 14-day period right now and come back to that at another time. And Mr. Mills, can you help me with my amendment to how to say it, or Mr. Lytle?
Well, you could just delete that section.
Just delete that section, yes. I'd like to make
sections.
I'd like to make an amendment that we delete that section tonight, but
It's 206.3Q.
yes.
What was the name of it? Which number? 2063?
It's 206.3Q.
Okay.
And we can always come back and reconsider it when we have a full council.
Okay, that's your amendment?
That's our amendment.
Okay,
And somebody has to second it, or it dies.
We have an amendment. We have an amendment on the floor for to remove section 206.3Q. Do I have amendment? Do we have a second to that amendment?
Second.
And that's just the bed and breakfast, right?
Well, can I ask a question and make a clarification?
We do
on
have
it?
a motion and a second, so it's on the floor.
Yeah,
So we can
yes.
certainly discuss that. Yes, Mr. Mills. Yes.
Okay. First of all, one clarification. There was a comment that they could rent it out to parties and events. That's not true. That's limited to 5 people is the most you could do it for. So you could rent it out for some special event. The second is just a question which Danny had. This is in 2 different sections of the code. One is the 206.3Q, which is the bed and breakfast in single family areas. We also have that in the 206.26D, which deals with the short-term rentals.
Goodness.
So would your amendment delete both of those sections or just the 206.3Q?
Motion was 206.3Q, so they need to change the motion if they
Or
want
have
to
another
do-
motion,
Yeah, right.
another vote?
Can we word it? Would it be because the numbers are are troubling to me. Most folks are sitting out here in the audience are going like 2063Q. Whoa, what are you talking about?
me too.
Why don't you, Mr. Womack, I'd ask you to go ahead, if you could, just for parliamentary process, if you would withdraw
I will withdraw it.
withdraw your amendment, and then if you would, I think it would work better if you just spoke the amendment that say that we would exclude the portion in the ordinance that states the 12-day exemption.
Okay, I
The
withdraw
14
the
days.
motion if whoever second me is okay with that.
Okay.
Okay.
So the motion,
I
so
would
the
like
motion,
to make
the amendment is withdrawn
Okay.
is now withdrawn, Mr. McLean.
And I'd like to make an amendment that we remove 2063.3Q and 206.26D, which provide for exemption to allow owner-occupied dwellings to rent for up to 5 days for a maximum of 14 days in any 12 consecutive months, to specify that the owner must obtain a temporary short-term rental permit from the Cookeville Codes Department. Is that
Yes, sir.
Is
Thank
that-
you.
is
Thank
that
you.
adequate?
Thank you, Councilman Womack. And so we have an amendment on the floor. Do we have a second on that amendment?
But, Mr. Wong, before you ask for a second, 206.3Q relates to the 14-day exemption for bed and breakfast. 206.26D relates to the 14-day exemption for the short-term rental properties. That latter part that you read, to specify that the owner must obtain a temporary short-term rental permit from the Cookeville Codes Department, that's not in there yet.
Okay.
So I think what you're saying, and what I understand you to say, and I think is sufficient for the record, your motion is to delete these two sections, 206.3Q and 206.26D, which provide for these 14-day exemptions.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's sufficient if anybody cares to second that.
Second.
All right, and just with the gentleman, the council member that's making the amendment, you're okay with that, Councilman Womack?
Yes.
Okay, so we have that amendment on the floor, and then we do have a second. So now, we've got that straightened out. Discussion on the amendment as stated.
Discussion on the amendment, Mr. Chairman. I'm comfortable with that. I think what we have is a good start, and I think this kind of provision probably needs some more study. I see some other things in here that I think need some more study, like the 3,000 square foot. That to me that says you can only do this if you have a big house. And that seems to me to be a little bit elitist and disqualify some people who might need or qualify to do that otherwise. I'm not advocating we do that now, but I'm just saying that these are that you just mentioned, Chuck, and even the one I just pointed out, and maybe some other provisions that we just don't let this go. We continue to look at this and study these aspects of it as we move forward. See, what we're dealing with is, and if I might just make a couple of observations and I'm through, and I guess in a sense these are good problems to have because this is my third term on the council and like none ever before, the challenge of dealing with, growth as competing with quality of life is something that we're really dealing with to a great degree in this community right now. And I guess it gets back to what your philosophy of government is. And I don't want to be too academic about this, but my personal view is the best government is the government close to you, right here in the city. And I couldn't agree more with what Councilman Woodford has said. There has been some discussion about, and I understand how reasonable people could feel this way. Well, the legislature could do something in 60 days and 90 days that would just undo everything that you've done. Yeah, and that is totally within the realm of possibility. But as leaders, elected leaders of the community, I don't believe it's in our best interest or the city's best interest to sit around and wait on that. We need to do what we believe is in the best interest of the city and continue to look at it and work on it in that regard. And there has been a lot of time put into this. There's been a lot of citizen input put into this. And I think regardless of if we vote it up or we vote it down, we need to take some action at the local level. And whatever the legislature does, they do. We can't control that, and we may have to adjust accordingly. But as elected leaders, it's incumbent upon us to step forward and do something here. And this, in my view, is a good first step. And I'm comfortable with your amendment, Chuck. And,
Thank you.
And I would say that we could continue to study that as well as the 3,000 square foot requirements and possibly other things. But a lot of time's going into this, and I appreciate the effort.
Okay, so let's go ahead and vote on the amendment. And prior to that, I'd like to just say something very quickly. I'm gonna go ahead and let you just be total for transparency and clarification. I'm gonna vote no on the amendment. here at the start for the amendment that Dr. Womack has presented, simply because this is our first reading. We are going to have a lot of time to again, look this over and study this, as you mentioned, Councilman Henry, that we have lots of time to explore a lot of these other things. And for me personally, I have not heard enough from both sides of the exemption, of the 14-day exemption, enough to feel very educated to make a declarative yes or no. So I'm going to vote no on it just for that reason, so I can study it some more. So okay, we have an amendment on the floor. Gentlemen, you prepared to vote? All right, vote yes or no.
3 yes, 1 no, motion carries.
Motion carries. All right, now we're back to the motion, to the original motion as amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do we have any more comments on our original motion for accepting these ordinances?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, is the motion to include the recommended revision? And I had two recommended revision. One, I guess, would no longer apply since we removed that section from the code, but the other was to set the 3 guest rooms in that one section. Does that?
I don't believe that was in the original motion. I think they did the ordinance as presented. Now if you want to propose that revision, if anybody wants to make a motion to the second amendment, the second proposed revision on the screen is moot by virtue of Councilman Womack's amendment. The first revision, I think, is still being proposed by Mr. Mills in the planning department.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So
the 3 guest rooms, limited to 3 guest rooms.
With respect to bed and breakfast only.
Well, I make a motion then that we do revise the proposed section 206.3B to specify a maximum number of guest rooms in a bed and breakfast home to be limited to 3.
So, for point of clarification, you're making a motion to amend.
Motion to amend.
All right. We have a motion to amend on the floor. Do I have a second? I have a motion to second.
Second.
Do we have any questions, comments on the amendment as on the floor? Yes, Mr. Henry.
Question about that particular member's name. It's my understanding that if you get more than 3 rooms, then at the state level, it gets to be defined as some sort of commercial business.
That's right. It kicks you up into another category, which we believe is not residential at all in character. And that's the main reason for doing that. The second reason is that to determine parking, you must declare how many guest rooms you're going to have. So it makes sense that we put in here what a maximum is. And it shouldn't be more than 3 because, again, Dwight, as you said, it moves you up into another category by state statutes.
Any other questions for Mr. Mills or anybody else? So we have an amendment on the floor. We're voting on the amendment. So if you're ready to vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Amendment carries. Okay, so we're again back to the original motion, correct? We're back to original motion, which is we start all this. Gentlemen, do you have any more questions or comments from Mr. Mills? I did have just one thing. I mean, my fellow council members basically stated all the things that I've been thinking and going through my mind. This has been a very long piece of work. It is, Mr. Woodford mentioned, it is a work in progress, and it really is. I really think what we do now is not where things are going to land. Cookeville is going to be Cookeville, and it's going to, how this lands is going to, I think, fulfill the needs of Cookeville and Cookvillians. So I think there'll probably be more amendments and more changes to this as we go forward. And 2, it says also, Mr. Henry, you mentioned this, and I want to reinforce that. It's kind of an exciting time. Peer-to-peer, the peer-to-peer business that's out there that the computer is going on for those of you with the gray heads that are used to dealing with things over the phone and calling the Chamber of Commerce. This is a whole new world for us, and we're not the first city that's had to deal with this sort of stuff. So it's in many ways it's exciting because it opens up whole different kinds of economies and opportunities for communities to show their best, but it also is challenging because it does have it presents challenges to also challenges with it, communities such as like quality of life and residential stuff. So I consider this a significant work in progress, and I look forward to trying to make more decisions to clean this up, make it even better. So with that said, if my members are ready to vote, we'll vote yes or no on the motion as amended.
4 yes votes on the amendment 1 and amendment 2.
And the original, this was no, Ms. McClay, I think this was for the original motion. So we should.
You've passed the ordinance on first reading.
You
okay.
passed it. Okay, so we're good.
As amended.
So we're good. Are we good?
The 2 amendments.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Sorry for that point of confusion. I was trying to keep things clear and I just kind of messed it up. All right. So we're gonna move on to, we're still in new business. We have, get down to item T and we're on item B. And thank you guys for your time and your patience with this. 7B, it's to hold a public hearing and consider on the first reading ordinance O-171121, modification of prior recommendation for closure and declaration as surplus alleys that are located off South Oak Avenue, Depot Street, and portions of the south right-of-way of Depot Street, and then consider for approval acceptance of property as rights-of-ways for South Oak Avenue, South Cedar Avenue, Depot Street, and then an alley located between South Cedar and South Oak Avenues. This again is sponsored by Mr. James Mills. You just ran everybody out.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. This is the general location of the properties we're looking at. In November of last year, the Planning Commission approved a request from Oxen Wilson LLC, Cookeville Downtown Hotels LLC to close and abandon and declare surplus property, the rights-of-ways of 2 streets, portions of 2 alleys, bisecting their properties located on South Oak and Depot Streets. Also approved in 16 was the declaration of surplus property portions of the southern right-of-way of Depot Street and the acquisition from Oxen Wilson in exchange for the right-of-way certain portions of their properties. An ordinance was prepared by the based on the Planning Commission's recommendations submitted to the council, which was ordinance 161225, and it was approved on first reading in January of this year. Final consideration of the ordinance was postponed by the council until such time as the exact boundaries of the properties proposed to be exchanged and the final purchase price was determined. So what we didn't know at the time in 16 was how much property they were proposing to donate or exchange along, primarily there along Cedar. That same ordinance failed to pass on second and final reading on October 19th, or a little more than a month ago. Subsequent to all this, Oxen Wilson and the Cookeville Downtown Hotel submitted a proposal for a new exchange, which was substantially different from the one approved in 2016. Then the new proposal, the Allen Street right-of-ways to be acquired by Oxen Wilson are similar but less than what was previously approved. However, the property to be acquired by the city is greatly increased. The amount of property that would have been required along South Cedar Avenue has increased, and new property along an alley to the southern boundary, which is through here, is now proposed for acquisition by the city. And just to illustrate the differences, in 16, the Planning Commission approved the sale of approximately 17,366 square feet of right-of-ways and partial exchange from properties from Oxen Wilson and Cookeville Downtown Hotels totaling 4,491 square feet. So that was the trade in 16. The new proposal, the city would close and declare surplus approximately 13,212 square feet, and in exchange we would receive approximately 15,265 square feet. The proposal here is for a straight-up exchange. There's no money involved. Now, the lesser amount of square footage of the right-of-way to be closed comes from the reduction of right-of-way that was located on Depot. So previously, this is the previous proposal, and you can see the area here on Depot that they were proposing to acquire. And this is the new proposal. There's just very few areas here on Depot that they would now obtain from the city. So this ordinance would approve the closure of the alley right-of-ways and portions of right-of-ways of Depot, and also authorize the exchange of these properties with Oxen Wilson and Cookeville Downtown Hotels. This exchange and closure and abandonment was approved by the Planning Commission, and the Planning Department concurs with this recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Do we
Wait,
have?
I want to show you our new drone photos here. I'm really proud of our drone.
Sorry.
Oh. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. These are today's photos, so you can get an idea of the property that you're looking at. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but we are proud of this thing.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Nice.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Who got to drive the drone?
Ben, he is our pilot, licensed pilot.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Okay, we have this portion, we get the public hearing. If anybody would like to get up and speak on this particular issue, just get up, state your name and where you're from, where you live. All right, I don't see anybody getting up, so we'll close the public hearing portion of it. All right, do I have a motion to accept this first reading?
So moved.
Second.
Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions, comments, discussion? If none, let's vote. Yes or no?
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, 7B. We are now on to 7C. It's hold a public hearing and consider on first reading ordinance 0171122, and this is acceptance of Tennessee Avenue. This is north of Interstate 40, and this is our new street this is being done for street, and this is for city maintenance, and upon completion of construction and establishing restriction for access. Again, Mr. Mills.
Mr. Vice Mayor, members, this is the location of Tennessee Avenue, which, as you know, the construction of Tennessee Avenue was required by the Department of Transportation as a condition for the construction of the 5th interchange at what was previously the intersection of Mine Lick Creek Road. Here is a more detailed map of the street. Is a length of about 15,073 feet or 2.86 miles. It has 42 feet of pavement surface and consists of two 12-foot travel lanes with paved shoulders 10 feet in width. It's located within a right-of-way that has a 160 feet in width. This is an aerial view. It's some more cool drone photos. This starts from the interstate going to the north, and you can see this is as of last week. And this is what you would be accepting. We need to accept this street to allow public traffic on it, which, Mike, it's supposed to be opened here pretty soon, Greg?
Hopefully by the end of the month or first week.
Okay, so it needs to be a street before we allow traffic on here. What this ordinance also does that you touched on, Mr. Vice Mayor, it establishes restrictions on access to this. We were required as a condition of the contract for the construction of this to comply with TDOT requirements limiting access on this, which would be a limited access street. The only access points would be from, these are one of them, these would be from these predetermined, prelocated access points or from existing streets, which would include Buffalo Valley, 70, and at Mine Lick Creek Road. So you would have 7 access points from this. This ordinance prohibits driveways as access to this. And again, this is done to comply with our contract with TDOT. The idea here is that this would be developed as parallel access streets in the future. The intention here is to avoid situations like we have in the future. Again, we're trying to look ahead here to avoid like we have on Jefferson, where you have so many driveways that it really affects traffic flow. And that's the intent here, is to maintain the traffic carrying capacity of the street. But we would recommend for approval of this ordinance. It's been approved by the Planning Commission.
Do I have a motion to accept?
Second.
Well, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions, comments, or discussion on this item? Yes, Councilman Henry.
Is it public hearing? Let's see. I should have clarity, James, on this already. I'm sorry that I don't. Does this effectively make us a city street with giving us all rights and responsibilities, or just the responsibility of maintaining it?
This makes it a city street, and it is a city street. Yes, all rights and responsibilities. Is not correct, Mike? Danny, I mean, that's the intent.
Okay, so this becomes our street.
Yes.
Okay, with all the rights.
It's our street, but we're still subject to the contract we had with the Department of Transportation for the construction. Is that, explaining that right, Mike?
Yes, you are. We're still under that agreement with TDOT related to the restricted access to it.
So it's our street, but we still gotta do what TDOT tells us to do.
That's really what I was asking.
I want you to pave the potholes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking
No, that's fine. That's fine. Great. Any other points of discussion? If none, let's vote. Vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay. Item 7D is consider resolution R171218, and accepting the Cookeville corridor analysis and a major street plan update. Again, Mr. James Mills.
Mr. Vice Mayor and council members, as you know, in 2016, we were applied and were awarded a community transportation planning grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation. WSP, formerly known as Parsons Brinkerhoff, was the consulting firm selected by TDOT to prepare a transportation study for the city. Our study consisted of a update of our major street plan and a corridor analysis. We also paid some additional funds for a look at synchronization of our signals. Anyway, you're aware that the plan has been completed and was presented earlier this year. The adoption of this resolution is necessary to close out the grant, and we would recommend approval of the resolution to accept the corridor analysis and major street plan update.
So in order for us to close out the grant, we need to have a motion to accept this.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any points of discussion or questions? Hearing none, let's all vote. Vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
All right, item 7E, consider resolution R171221. It's authorizing the submittal of a community transportation planning grant application to TDOT for the purpose of a pedestrian and bicycle circulation master plan update.
Mr. Vice Mayor, members, council members, recently at an RPO meeting, Rural Planning Organization meeting, we were notified that there's another round of community transportation planning grant monies available. We were encouraged to apply, and we are eligible to apply. The purpose of this grant, if you authorize the submittal of grant application, is to update our pedestrian and bicycle circulation plan, which was adopted in 2003. So we would be of benefit to us to have it updated. There's been some minor changes in the grant program. The total amount that can be obtained is now $125,000. It was $250,000 last year, but the match remains the same, which is 10%. So the maximum that we would be obligated to provide as a match would be $12,500. This resolution authorizes the city manager to apply for the grant and commits the city to the 10% match, and the planning department would respectfully request your approval.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Do we have a second? I mean, a motion to put this on the floor in a second.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any points of discussion, questions? Not hearing any. If we're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item 7F is consider authorizing the city manager to execute a professional services agreement relative to the City of Cookeville's ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. And this is finally sponsored by somebody else, Ms. Gail Fowler.
Vice Mayor and Council, this agreement is going to be in keeping with our continued commitment toward meeting TDOT's requirements that we learned about last year to continue to make our municipalities compliant with the ADA requirements. The city is required to have completed the self-evaluation of facilities and have a transition plan in place by the end of 2019. This agreement is with Kimley Horn. It's a planning and designing engineering consultant that's well versed in assisting local governments in their efforts to ensure the facilities are ADA compliant. They're going to be using some data that we've provided. The total cost of the agreement with Kimley Horn, it's a shocker. It's $593,900. The projected length of the project is 12 months. Upon completion of the project, the city will have a clearly prioritized schedule of actions that will meet the obligations set forth by TDOT through FHWA. The good news is funding for this project is being provided through an 80-20 grant from the Tennessee Department of Transportation. The grant was previously applied for and has been awarded for this purpose. So the grant amount with TDOT is going to pay $475,120, and the city's portion of the cost is $118,780, and that's what I'm requesting your approval for this evening to obligate that cost. Happy to try and answer any questions, but would you request your approval?
All right, thank you, Ms. Fowler. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Okay, do we have any questions, comments, or discussion related to this item? All right, hearing no discussion points, if you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item 7G, consider resolution R171219, certifying the mayor's letter of commitment to TDOT relative to the City of Cookeville's ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. Again, this is Ms. Gail Fowler.
Vice Mayor and Council, once again, this item is directly related to the commitments we've made with TDOT in order to keep our funds in check and continuing to become ADA compliant. This resolution is simply certifying a letter from the mayor to TDOT that strives and commits to our plan. Communities must provide the written letter from the mayor outlining development of the transition plan, and our letter also states that the status of the ADA self-evaluation and transition plan are in progress, and thanks to your prior approval that the city has entered into a contract for professional services to provide compliance assessment and review of our compliance status. Happy to try and answer any questions, but would respectfully request your approval.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fowler. Okay, let's get a motion and a second to see if we can write a letter. I need a motion and a second on the floor.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion on this item? Hearing none, if you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, item 7H is consider resolution number R171220, authorizing participation in the TML Risk Management Pool Property Conservation Grant. Again, Ms. Gail Fowler.
Vice Mayor and Council, we are very pleased that the Tennessee Risk Management Pool is again offering this property conservation matching grant program. They provide 50% matching funds, and we have submitted for the purchase of security cameras for multiple leisure services, parks, and maintenance facilities. The maximum reimbursement is $5,000, and we are going to submit for a not to exceed $5,000. The cost that we've developed for the security cameras and the peripherals that are required with that will be about $10,000. So we plan to install these at Cane Creek Park Maintenance and Concession Buildings, the General Maintenance Building that's on 15th Street, the Cane Creek Soccer Fields Maintenance Building, and we're also going to get them in Cinderella Park, West End Park, Cane Creek Rec Center, and the Cane Creek Gymnasium. I think it will be a nice addition and provide some additional security and property conservation. Be happy to try and answer any questions you might have. Would respectfully request your approval.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. Okay, we have a motion up there. Do I need a motion and a second? Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Motion and a second. Do we have any discussion on this grant for cameras? If there's no discussion, if you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Okay, item 7I. This is consider approval of purchase agreement and memorandum of understanding to acquire approximately 3.55 acres at the intersection of Neal Street and Old Walton Road, and that's part of tax map 066 parcel 33.00. This is sponsored by Mr. Mike Davidson.
Vice Mayor and council members, as you all know, and for a number of years, the city has been discussion, study of trying to construct a new police station. And then I think in 2014, you authorized a needs assessment to be conducted as part of that process. 2015, we received that report, gave us an outline of what we need to look to the future for in this facility, and also what we needed to look for in property. For the last 2 years, it's taken us 2 years since that needs assessment was complete to move to this step. It's a major step in trying to get this facility constructed for the police department and the citizens of Cookeville. The agreement, if approved, would authorize the city to purchase 3.55 acres at the corner of Neal Street and Old Walton Road. The purchase price is $600,000. The seller has already had a Phase 1 environmental report completed. They provided that to us. We reviewed it along with the architect that performed the needs assessment and engineers. They found nothing in that report that was concerning to them. Also, previously the seller had a geotechnical report done on the site. There was nothing identified in that report either. As part of the construction process, if you approve this agreement, we will have additional geotechnical work done on that 3.55 acres just to make sure what type foundation would need to be constructed there. But again, in the report they submitted, there were no significant issues cited in that report. The closing would be to occur by January 31 of 2018. As I mentioned in the needs assessment, this particular site was one of the top 5 that was identified as in terms of just meeting the criteria of property. Again, it's located at Neal Street and Old Walton Road. The memorandum of understanding is additional agreement between the seller and the city to try to help move this along. The city there needs to be some improvements done to Old Walton Road at the intersection of Neal Street. The city would improve that approximately 400 feet of roadway there. It would comply with the city street standards. We would install there would be 2 travel lanes, 1 turn lane, and we would also install sidewalks along those improvements. The seller would dedicate all the right-of-way and deed that right-of-way to the city of Cookeville for those improvements along Old Walton Road off of their property. In addition, the city would construct what we call an access road that runs east, parallel with the property the city is proposing to purchase. That would give us access into the back of this property for the facility. That would be approximately 488 feet. It would be a public street. Again, it'll comply with city street standards, 2 travel lanes, a turn lane. Will also install sidewalk. The seller, again, will dedicate the right-of-way and deed that to the city of Cookeville as well. The road constructions and improvements that we're talking about would be constructed in-house with our public works forces. And the seller is providing the engineering and roadway improvement plans that we will construct by. And I don't know if you recall, on that particular site, there's a topsoil that has been stored on that site for a number of years, and the seller will donate that topsoil to the city as well. I know our Public Works Department's excited about that, as well as other departments have already asked if they could have access to some of that topsoil. The seller will extend the water and sewer lines into the property to serve the property, not just our site, but the entire 37-acre tract. On the screen is a plat that has already been recorded. This is the 3.55 acres. Again, this is just a different view of it. Think, as Mr. Mills pointed out, another view, and then there's another slide that, hey, there's our drone again.
Hey.
So this is a look back from Old Walton Road back to the north. You can see Nashville State across the Neal Street from the proposed property. And again, speaking with Chief Evans, looking through the needs assessment, it meets all the points identified in that needs assessment. Again, $600,000, and it's a major step forward in this process, and I would ask your approval.
All right, we have item 7I is on the floor. Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second, so it's on the floor. Let's go ahead. Do we have some discussion? Gentlemen, yes. Yes, Dwight?
If I could preface my question with this, and nobody, with the possible exception of Chief Evans, is any more excited than I am about being at this point with the new police headquarters. This has been a priority of this council since literally the day we took office, and this is a big step, and I'm excited about it. But I want to make sure, and I think I know, Mike, the answer to this, but just for my own personal reasons. Well, you mentioned the environmental studies and geotech studies had already been done, but we have some, and I'm referring back to a conversation we had at the work session. We have some pending geotech studies that need to be done, and of course we're all aware we're blessed with or cursed with an abundance of caves in this area. So those, the people who know more about this than I do, the professionals, don't have any reason to believe. I mean, those studies could come back that we're going to do is the possibility or probability of those studies saying, hey, after all, this is not a good place to build it, and we've already bought it, if that's the case. So the purpose of those studies is to determine the type of foundation, not to determine whether it's good to go as far as what would be a proper place for geologically for our police headquarters to be. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, and that's correct. I mean, if you approve this agreement, we'll move forward with the purchase, again, closing to occur by the end of January 2018. But what the seller has provided and what has been reviewed, there's been nothing noted in those particular reports that caused any concern. Not to say there's not something there once you start moving more dirt, but right now there's nothing that's been identified. The one thing I've learned the last few years, or in my 20 years here with the city, is as we construct roads, again, it's back to what you said, what we're blessed with or what we're cursed with. From a geotechnical standpoint, you could drill a hole in one spot and literally find something totally different just 10 feet away. So, again, the pending geotechnical work that we would do on this site would be, if something's identified, it would be to help us identify what type foundation would be needed on that particular corner. And again, that work would, of the geotechnical work would just be help us decide what type foundation to build. If they find something, that'll depend on the type foundation to build, but hopefully we don't run into anything.
But at this point, there's no reasonable reason to believe that worst case scenario, we could buy this and then not be able to build there. I mean, that wouldn't be the end of the world. That's not our mission. That's not our goal. But there's no reasonable reason to believe that these new geotechnical studies would show that it's not doable on that location.
No, there's no indication at this point that there's any issues there with that particular property. Again, if something is identified, we'll figure out the best way to mitigate that.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilman Womack.
Will we be able to have a groundbreaking for it before we go out of office?
Well, we'll definitely have some dirt moving,
Okay.
ribbon cutting or something before
Jeez.
you.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Mayor, this has been a long process coming. It's been like one step forward and two back. It is a wonderful situation for us to have an opportunity as a council to be part of a major municipality building construction, in this case the police station. It's an opportunity that probably comes every 50 or 75 years for most councils to be able to do something like this. It'll be the first time in over 50 years that we'll have a police station visible instead of subterranean. And on a major access road that will be easy to find and locate the police station. We're very proud of our police department. I think this building will be an indication of how we feel about the department. I'm just glad this opportunity came to us. We had budgeted, more money than this originally, trying to locate property. The property owner wanted to work, and it's wonderful that an individual property owner wanted to work with the city, and we could come to an agreement to cooperation. It is beneficial to both parties, and we're very glad that this can work out and that we can get this done. Hopefully, Councilman Womack, that we'll see a foundation being torn up by June or July of next year, hopefully, or maybe sooner. But I'm very proud that we're able to do this for the police department.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Woodford. I'm very proud too. You're right. This is something that just didn't start in 2003. We've been working on this in our last term, Jim. We've already got kind of a conceptual plan. Have polled all the department heads to see what kind of best building would suit Cookeville's needs. One of the things that you guys have already mentioned, everything that needs to be said, except that one of the things that's exciting about this is not just a subterranean. It's a lot better than a subterranean police station. It's also it's going to be a public space. One of the things I'm very excited about is to be a public space. It's not just going to be a police station where this is be some place that Cookeville's going to be very proud of and be able to all the citizens will be able to use. And I just hope someone, please, when we do the ribbon cutting, if I can just get an invitation, All right. So we do have a motion and a second on item 7I. If you're prepared to vote, everybody prepared to vote? All right. Please vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
All right. And it's still not done. I mean, all we've done is bought land. Okay, so we still have work to do, but we've got the wheels in motion. That is exciting. Okay, item 7J: consider approval of purchase agreement to acquire approximately 1.16 acres at 103 and 117 East First Street. On the tax map, it's listed as 53G parcel 2.00. Expansion of Dogwood Park. And again, this is brought forward by Mr. Mike Davidson.
Mayor or Vice Mayor and council members again. One of the crown jewels in the city of Cookeville is Dogwood Park. And there's been discussion for a long time of possibly trying to expand it. I know going back all the way to 2014, this particular property was for sale. The previous city manager started those conversations with the family and trying to acquire that property. We have off and on been talking since that period of time and trying to work out some agreement to acquire that property. And what I ask you to consider tonight is the acquisition of that 1.16 acres. It's $625,000 or approximately $12.45 per square foot. The agreement does call the city to purchase the property as is, and that's simply because the seller did disclose there was a house at 117. That house burned. There were some of the materials, the masonry materials were buried on site. And so they did disclose that to us. The closing would be prior to February 28th. There's another house at 103. Assuming you approve this purchase, the seller will give notice to the tenant in that house that they would need to vacate because the city will look to tear that house down sometime during the winter time. But again, I would ask you to consider approving this purchase so we could look at expanding Dogwood Park.
Thank you. Okay, item 7J, do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
A motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion.
I think this is a wonderful opportunity to expand Dogwood Park going from Broad to First. This will give an opportunity for leisure service to, expand parking on that side, long-range plans, maybe make an event area out of that. It has become the pride of Cookeville, this park, and anything we can add to its luster is a benefit to the city and the citizens that live here.
I'm excited about it. I think we were able to buy the land for the police station for less than we originally thought, and we're able to use the monies that we allotted, some of the monies that we allotted for that, to be able to do this purchase. So I'm very excited. We're getting a twofer.
Yeah, that's, Mr. Henry, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, I'll just add very briefly, it really is exciting to see the continued development of this park. And, I remember the time when it was some very pretty rose bushes and maybe the best kept secret in town, but different councils have contributed to the growth of that park. I know Councilman Womack and I were on the council and he was very instrumental in the amphitheater there, then later the water feature, and then the acquisition of Cotton Eye Joe's and all that's happened. And this will just make even better what is a very, very special, precious thing that adds a lot to the quality of life. And, I'm excited about this purchase and what's going to continue to happen there.
Yeah, and we don't really have any ideas what to do with it yet. We just know that it's exciting, and we've got a few ideas. I'm sure there's some of our officials already have some ideas, but we don't have anything set in concrete, so it's gonna be exciting to see. We'd like to hear from the public too, to see what they would prefer. So that said, if you're prepared to vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Thank you.
I'll clap for that one. Yeah. All right, item 7K, consider approval of supplement to Wiser Consultants contract for the performance of construction, engineering, and inspection services for Phase 2 of the Bennett Road Extension Project. And this is sponsored by Mr. Greg Brown.
Mayor and Council, Wiser Consultants is performing construction, engineering, and inspection services for Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the Bennett Road project, which is Tennessee Avenue. Phase 1 is substantially complete. Phase 2 has gone past the end date of the construction contract. The end date construction, the original date was 6/14/17. Back in April, we extended the project to September 28. We're still going on with it now. It is in liquidated damages. Since we're using TDOT money, we're required to have inspection services on site. Wiser has estimated what it would take for them to be on site and finish up the job. That amount is $156,643.49. As I said, the liquidated damages are $1,000 per day. We hope that should pay for most of this, if not all of the extra costs. Hopefully we won't use all of this money. Just a summary of the whole CEI project. On the South project, our contract amount was $425,723. It was substantially complete on June 14th. We have $36,321 remaining in that contract. The contract for the North project was $405,099. As of 10/31, they had overrun $44,445. We have not paid that yet till we get this extension, but we can't stop the construction, so they're still on the job. Hopefully we can get this passed. Projected date of completion for the North project is 12/30/17. They're working on it right now, trying to get the binder and base asphalt on the 70 intersection with Tennessee Avenue, so hopefully we can make that date. And I would request your approval.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
So we do have a motion and a second, so items on the floor. Do we have any points of discussion? Not hearing any. If you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Greg, all right, buddy.
Clapping session.
This is a productive day.
All right, item 7L, consider authorizing the city manager to execute sale documents for property located on 12 Venture Drive in reference to JR Systems LLC, sponsored by Ms. Melinda Kiefer.
Evening, Vice Mayor and Council. We have for you tonight a request to authorize the city manager to execute sale documents for property located at 12 Venture Drive in the Highlands Business Park. This is approximately 4.3 acres. If you look at the map on the next slide, you'll see that it is the corner property of Lee Seminary and Venture Drive. We were approached a few weeks ago by a local financial software development company by the name of Oculus. They have a good long history here in Putnam County and very steeped in family. They are ready to grow and offer some new financial software products on the open market. We're asking pending approval from the County Commission, since we are 50-50 joint owners, that we do 120-day due diligence period in order for the new owners, potential new owners, to go ahead and do their due diligence during that time, for them to do their phase one and their any geotech they need to. The client will purchase the property from the city and the county for $20,000 an acre, and I respectfully request your approval.
Thank you, Ms. Kiefer. All right, do we have a motion to accept this as listed?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion or questions, comments?
Real quick question, Melinda, and I should know this already. Has the county commission already taken action on this, or is that on the near agenda in the future? Have they acted on this already?
They'll have their meeting December 18th.
18th, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion? All right. If you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Thank you.
This item 7M, consider approval of the final payment to Tank Pro Incorporated for modification and repainting of the 15th Street water storage tank. And this is sponsored by Mr. Ronnie Kelly.
Mayor and council, or vice mayor and
Yeah,
council, sorry about
Everybody's
that.
kind of messing that up.
You guys know what the old tank used to look like out there. We finally have wrapped it up, that project. That's what it looks like today. It turned out pretty well.
Yeah, it looks great.
Council awarded the contract on January 30th, 2017 in the amount of $624,142. We executed one change order for a deduction of $26,200.30. This reduced the total contract amount to $597,941.70. Contract called for completion date of September 20th, 2017. Tank Pro reached contract completion on November 15th, 2017, which exceeded the contract completion date by 86 days. Contract specified that a $500 a day liquidated damages for every calendar day beyond the contract. This equals $43,000. Our department has incurred actual expenses of $18,450.86 due to the delay in the project completion. Tank Pro has requested that the City of Cookeville reduce the contractual liquidated damages to the actual expenses incurred by our department. It is my recommendation that the council accept this $18,450.86 deduct by the contractor on the final balance. This covers our ratepayers' added expense and will allow us to close out the project. If you so choose to take that, the final contract would therefore be $579,490.84.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. All right, we have item is listed. Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
So we do have a motion and a second. It is on the floor. Do we have any questions, comments, or discussions? On the item. Hearing none, if you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
Thank
4
you.
yes votes, motion carries.
Item 7N, consider authorizing the city manager to execute a pole attachment regulation amendment with TVA, and this is sponsored by Mr. Tony Peak.
Vice Mayor and Council, like some of the other items you've discussed tonight, seems like we've been talking about this for a few years now. Back in 2016, the TVA board decided
to start regulating pole attachment agreements for all of their distributors, some 148 distributors of TVA power. What they wanted to do is develop a fully allocated cost methodology for determining what those pole rates would be. And that requires an amendment to the power contract to provide for the pole attachment methodology. And the fully allocated cost methodology is designed, as you know, to ensure both the proper recovery of CED's cost and make sure that CED's ratepayers are not subsidizing other lines of business that have a non-electric purpose. And what we would do is we'd apply those new rates to calendar 2018 attachment and send the bill near the end of 2018 or the first of 2019. And we're probably looking at the possibility of phasing that increase over about 2 or 3 years to make it easy on everyone. So with that, I'd answer any questions you might have, but recommend your approval.
So again, this item is as listed. Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion or questions for Mr. Tony Peak? If none, if you're prepared to vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item O, consider authorizing the city manager to execute pole attachment agreement with Windstream KDL LLC. They're out of Kentucky, and Deltacom LLC out of Alabama. Again, Mr. Tony Peak.
Give me 1 second.
Like that one.
Okay, here we go. Appreciate your patience. This item is relative to the item that you just approved. This is another pole attachment agreement. This agreement is with Windstream KDL LLC Kentucky and Deltacom LLC Alabama. They join Frontier Wireless here in Cookeville, Twin Lakes Communication here in Cookeville, and Iris Networks as requesting a new pole attachment agreement that does include the TVA regulation language. And again, the TVA board approved that in 2016. In 16, we were able, the city manager, city attorney, and I, to work several months on coming up with an agreement. This agreement is verbatim to the other agreements with Frontier, Twin Lakes, and Iris, and others. I'd recommend your approval.
Mr. Peak has listed an item for us to consider. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions for Mr. Peak or discussion? I do have just a quick question. Where's it at here? Windstream and Deltacom, are they going to provide any more new? Do they provide any more new services, or is it just managing the services they currently are to that on that pole?
Managing services that are currently on the pole. They do not really offer services to our customers in Cookeville. They're just passing through. They may offer some type of service to some of our other providers like Frontier or Twin Lakes.
Just curious. All right. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. If you're prepared to vote, all please vote.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item 7P, consider approval to purchase a police canine officer, and this is sponsored by the Cookeville Police Department, Chief Randy Evans.
Mayor and council, as you may remember, we recently retired a K-9, and this purchase would be to replace that dog. We're going to recommend purchasing from FM K-9. The cost of the K-9 itself is $6,500. The cost of the training course for the handler is $6,500 for a total of $13,000. We actually budgeted this item for $10,000 to be purchased out of our drug fund, so it will require a budget amendment of an additional $3,000. But we have the fund balance would support that, so I'd recommend your approval.
We We have an item to consider for motion and a second. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions or discussion for Chief Evans?
Chief Evans, when we were talking in the work session, depending on the breed, the service time for one of the K-9s is what, typically 8 years, 8 or 9 years?
Yes, sir. Usually the Malinois will get more service out of them and than the Shepherds. But like even with us, it depends upon the animal itself. So some are healthier than others.
I have a question. Do we already have this officer lined up and ready to go, or that picked out, or is this somebody that this is going to show up on our doorstep? I don't know if I'm asking that question correctly. Do we already have it? Is that officer already listed for us, and they're preparing this service?
The handler, the K-9 handler. We'll probably use an existing handler that we have.
Well, I'm talking about the K-9.
No. Actually, we will go, and of course we have already vetted this business, and so we will go and they will actually we will go and look at whatever they have in stock, and then evaluate the animal at that time and pick out the dog that's right for us and our handler and our training methods.
Yeah, I was curious how that went. Okay.
And make that selection at that time.
Very good. Well, thank you for clearing up for me. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are you prepared to vote?
Yes.
You prepared to vote? Vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item 7Q is consider approval to purchase components for mobile communication terminals. They're called MCTs for the Cookeville Police Department. Again, Chief Randy Evans.
Vice Mayor and Council, you may recall back in February we actually bid these items and we made some purchases back then. So one of the specifications of that bid process was that those prices would be good for a year, obviously for this purpose, for future purchases. So we'll be utilizing that bid that you approved back in February, purchasing 5 Fujitsu tablets at $1,780 a piece for a total of $8,900, and also the docks and the mounts, 5 of those at $949 each for $4,745 for a total, and then some ancillary items, some adapters, charge guards, and covers for $1,520. Good news is paid for out of a grant we received from the Tennessee Highway Safety Office in the amount of $15,165, and that's also a grant that you approved us to apply for and receive earlier this year. And I'd be glad to answer any questions, but I recommend your approval.
Thank you, Chief Evans. All right, we have an item listed for us. I need a motion and a second?
So moved.
So we have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions, comments, or discussion for Chief Evans? If not, and if you're prepared to vote, please vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
All right, item 7R, consider, this is new territory for me. I don't think I've ever got past Q. Here we go, R. Consider 7R is consider awarding the bid for a tractor with a side mower for the Public Works Department. This is sponsored by Mr. Greg Brown.
Mayor and Council, we recently bid for a tractor and side mower. We received 4 bids from 3 different bidders. The lowest responsive bid was from CMI Equipment for $68,220. The reason the low bidder was not responsive, they did not indicate what model tractor or mower they were bidding. This is a budgeted item. I request your approval.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, I need to get this going. We need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Do we have a motion and a second on this item? Is there any discussion or questions? If not, and if you're prepared to vote, please vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Item 7S, consider awarding a bid for a full catered meal for the father-daughter date night. This is from the Leisure Services Department, sponsored by Mr. Rick Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. It's an exciting time. We're getting ready for father-daughter date night, one of the most popular events that we do every year. It's coming up in February. 2 weekends in mid-February, and we advertise and receive bids for a full catered meal for those 4 nights, and we are recommending Meal Fit being the low bidder meeting specifications. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, but I recommend your approval.
Well, there's going to be at least one question. Clarification. So, all right.
Yes, the chocolate fountain is included.
It's not on the floor yet. Okay. Before we guess, I need a second. Motion is second.
Second.
All right. The item is now on the floor. Do you guys have any, gentlemen, have any questions? Yes.
At the risk of making a long meeting even longer, Rick, you know, we talked about how proud we are of Dogwood Park and police headquarters. The way this thing has grown has just been incredible. I had the blessing and opportunity to be at the very first one, which was held at Tex Campus. There was about 20 couples there, and now it's grown into 2 weekends with hundreds. And it is a great event. And the daughter that I took, and by the way, for the record, she and I did win the dance contest that time. So
yeah,
oh, get out.
We did.
I've seen you dance.
Not a lot of competition that night, but I'm so proud of what that this has become, and it is a real highlight of the year, and you should
great
be proud
event.
of the
Thank
director.
you.
Yeah. Thank you for your department for growing it.
Yes, very much.
Thank you.
And we didn't even have a chocolate fountain back in those days.
That's
I mean,
right.
It was rough.
Well, if you're prepared to vote, let's vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, and item 7T. Here report on our $2,800,000 general obligation bond issue series 2017. This is sponsored by Red Devil.
Vice Mayor and Council, I've got a very brief report on our bond sale that we had. You authorized the issuance of bonds at the September 21st council meeting not to exceed $2.8 million. The projects the bond proceeds are to be used for are the completion of Tennessee Avenue and beginning work on the new police headquarters. The capital outlay portion of this bond will cover a new fire truck and 2 vehicles for public works, 1 for codes, and a special utility vehicle for leisure services maintenance. Moody's rated the bond at a AA2 and upgraded our other debt outstanding to a AA2 from a AA3. The bonds were tax exempt bank qualified. The bonds were sold at a competitive public sale on October 27th. 5 bids were received. The lowest bid was 1.939813 from Hutchison, Shockey, Early and Company. The bonds were sold at a premium of $83,326.20 and will be repaid over 10 years. The bonds actually closed on November 15th. The bond issue cost totaled $62,270. Our financial advisor, Cumberland Securities, received $23,700 of that. Bond counsel, Waller, Lansden, Dortch, and Davis received $12,000. The rating agency, Moody's, received $11,500 of that, and the paying agent fee to U.S. Bank was $300. So you take the $2.8 million issue, add the premium of $83,326.20, subtract the bond cost of $62,270, and we had $2,821,056.20 deposited into the construction fund to be used for the projects. This debt issue brings our total general obligation debt outstanding to $23,772,000. And that is my report, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Himmel. On item T. All right, we have item T out there. I will need a motion in a second.
So moved.
Let's have a motion in a second. Do we have any discussion, questions, or comments? If none, and if you're prepared to vote, vote yes or no.
4 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, whew,
Thank
this finishes up our items that we have to hear and to vote on. Or we're on items 8, which is the portion that we have. If any citizens out there have an item that they would like to discuss or bring up to the city council, now's the time that you have an opportunity to do that. We ask that you just use decorum and keep your time to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody who would like to get up and speak on any item, like a Merry Christmas or something like that? No? All right. If none, then this is also have a chance to hear from our council members.
I'm good.
You guys done?
I'm happy.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I just might mention, I think we have a class here this evening.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't get to do this very often. I was wanted to make. I do have something I'd like to say is that the mayor sends his regrets for not being here. He has got caught up in. As everybody knows, he's got a house that he's working on building. He really got caught up in that had to attend to that. So he regrets that he could not be here. It was a very important meeting that we had, and he really wished he could be here. But yes, we have a class. Where are you guys from? Tech. What are you doing here?
What are you thinking?
Trying to keep her awake.
Journalism.
You find anything interesting? Oh, really? Oh, good. Okay. We'd like to hear a report from you when you get done. Okay. Well, we do appreciate. We do appreciate you guys coming. So if council members, if you don't, yeah, Ed, yes. And what high school? 2? 3? Well, how come you guys are like? So, okay, are you guys here for, are you in a class that you're in, or is this just kind of randomly you guys all showed up?
We're in honors government.
Oh, okay. Pretty exciting here watching this, isn't it?
They have a lot shorter meetings sometimes.
I think he has a,
for the mouths of babes. So you had your bar was really low, so it's like, hey, great. All right.
I think he has a future. He's already dipped out.
All right. Well, this was a good and fruitful meeting, and I don't have anything to say because we're done. You guys were pressing buttons pretty fast. I appreciate it, and thank you all, everybody, for coming. And hey, it's Christmas season. Go out and see the tree. It is wonderful. Merry Christmas.